No matter what you're looking for, Palm Beach makes it.
You can choose tennis or hockey.
Most of the footwear on show will shortly be available in the shops.
They laughed, rolled their eyes, and called it junk. Yet somehow these bizarre 1970s creations slipped into our lives and quietly rewrote what it meant to live, play, and dream. What if the things we once mocked were actually the heartbeat of a generation we didn't know we missed? It did not bark, it did not bite, it did not even exist. The invisible dog leash was one of those strange little inventions that snuck up on America without warning. At first glance, it was ridiculous. A stiff wire shaped like a leash with an empty loop that mimicked the taut pull of a dog collar. You would walk down the street, holding the plastic handle and pretending to guide an invisible pup, while strangers did a double take. It was a visual gag, a simple prank, a guaranteed head-turner at every state fair or carnival. People scoffed, called it dumb, but they still reached for their wallets. By the late 1970s, invisible dog leashes had crept into joke shops, novelty catalogs, and birthday parties across the country. There was a time when entire mall kiosks were devoted to these fake pets. What made it stick? Maybe it was how you got to act like the star of your own comedy skit. Maybe it was the joy of confusion. Maybe it was the little kid inside every adult who still wanted to believe in something absurd. Whatever it was, for a few strange years, invisible dogs were very real in American sidewalks and shopping centers, and they were impossible to ignore. Before Big Mouth Billy Bass ever serenaded you with Take Me to the River, the 1970s had its own army of mechanical misfits. This was the age of chattering teeth with wild red gums, dashboard hula girls with swaying plastic hips, and coin banks that grabbed your dollar with a skeleton hand. The technology was crude, the charm was offbeat, and the magic was in the movement. These toys were the predecessors of every animatronic goofball that came after. You might walk into a relative's house and spot a grinning tiki god that blinked when you clapped, or a wind-up nun that rolled on wheels and spit sparks. Weird? Absolutely. But that was the point. The 1970s was a decade of experimentation, not just in fashion or food, but in humor too. These mechanical oddities lived in gift shops, roadside attractions, and the shelves of your weirdo uncle's garage. At first, they seemed too silly to last, but the more they moved, the more they stayed. The secret was how they blurred the line between toy and art, joke and statement. They lit up, moved just enough, and always made someone laugh or stare. And by the time the 1990s rolled around, Billy Bass was just cashing in on a legacy that started way earlier, with a pair of teeth in a plastic tin and a hula girl who never stopped dancing. There was a time when being cool meant having the lowest seat and the highest handlebars. Banana seat bicycles were the kings of the sidewalk. That long, curved saddle with a rise in the back? It was like riding a velvet throne on wheels. These bikes looked like they were made for stunt doubles and rock stars, and that was exactly the point. A kid with a banana seat bike was not just going to school. They were arriving. The colors were wild, the paint jobs had glitter, and if you were really lucky, your bike had plastic streamers flowing out of the grips, catching the wind as you tore through the neighborhood. Grown-ups thought it looked silly. Some even called it dangerous. But to a kid, it was freedom with tassels. You could pop wheelies, cruise the block like Evel Knievel, and feel like you were the star of your own cartoon. The sissy bar in the back made room for your best friend, and the coaster brakes meant you never had to stop, unless you wanted to. This was not just a bike. It was a rite of passage. For a generation of kids in the 1970s, the banana seat bike was more than a ride. It was a status symbol, a fashion statement, and a memory machine all rolled into one. Metal lunchboxes were never quiet. They clanged, they dented, and they told stories. Each one was a loud little billboard for your favorite show, your favorite superhero, or the band you swore you'd marry someday. The plastic ones came later, lighter, cheaper, quieter, but they never had the soul of the metal ones. In the 1970s, bringing your lunch in a tin box meant something. It meant you had opinions. Whether you carried Scooby-Doo, Star Wars, or the Fonz on the side of your thermos, that was your brand. They were more than just containers for peanut butter and jelly. They were portable billboards for who you were or who you wanted to be. Every kid had one. Every kid banged it against a cafeteria table like a badge of honor. And when it rusted, you kept it anyway. Because that rust meant something. It meant use. It meant memories. The funny thing is, adults rolled their eyes at them, called them gimmicky, cheap, too noisy, but they bought them anyway. Because deep down, they knew what we all know now. Those lunchboxes were time capsules. They were snapshots of who we were, packed between apple slices and cheese sandwiches, and no Ziploc bag could ever hold a memory like that. No graphics, no story, no instructions, just 2 paddles, 1 blip, and endless hours of hypnotic battle. Pong was the video game that started it all, and almost no one took it seriously at first. The screen was black, the sounds were beeps, but the spell it cast? Unbreakable. The 1970s were full of gadgets that came and went, but Pong stayed. It lived in bars, arcades, basements, and college dorms. And even though it looked like someone's broken calculator screen, it made people line up with quarters in hand, begging for one more round. The beauty was in the simplicity. You were not battling monsters or flying ships. You were just bouncing a dot back and forth, praying your reflexes were good enough to keep the game alive. People laughed at it, called it boring, but they kept playing. Because Pong was not just a game, it was a revolution disguised as a toy. And even now, decades later, we still chase that same spark every time we pick up a controller. She smiled. Her hair flowed like sunlight, and her red one-piece swimsuit became the wallpaper of America's adolescence. The Farrah Fawcett poster was not just a photograph, it was a phenomenon. You could walk into almost any teenager's bedroom in the 1970s and find it hanging there, proud and permanent. It sold over 12 million copies. Think about that. More than some albums, more than some books. She became a symbol of glamour, of freedom, and for many of the first time, you really noticed the power of a poster. Parents were uneasy, teachers rolled their eyes, but no one could stop it. Farrah was everywhere. And even though people teased it, joked about the poster, they still secretly wanted one. Because it captured a feeling. The feeling of wanting to be seen, or maybe to see something that felt impossible to touch. And whether you saw her as a fashion icon, a television star, or just the most beautiful face in your world at the time, Farrah stayed with you. Not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of a moment you could never get back. Sonny and Cher were already a TV sensation, but in the 1970s, they crossed over into something stranger: plastic immortality. The Sonny and Cher dolls were celebrity toys that were equal parts fashion, fun, and full-blown camp. Picture Barbie dolls, but with bell-bottoms, faux fur, and microphone accessories. Cher came with glittering outfits and high cheekbones sculpted to perfection. Sonny had his mustache, his smile, and not much else. At first, the dolls were treated like a joke. Critics said they were too weird, too specific. But kids loved them. And the toy aisles lit up with pop culture possibilities. These were not just playthings. They were miniature avatars of television royalty. You could put on a whole concert in your bedroom. Change outfits, swap jokes, make them kiss or fight or tour the world on your shag carpet. Parents rolled their eyes, but even they knew the truth. The dolls were a hit. They gave kids a way to tap into the magic of celebrity, to hold fame in their hands and make it dance. And for all the teasing they got, Sonny and Cher proved that even in plastic, a little charisma goes a long way. If you grew up in the 1970s, you probably remember a time when pretend play meant miniature ovens, plastic vacuums, and tiny washing machines that somehow made your afternoon feel important. Susie Homemaker appliances were the odd little tools that turned the kitchen into a playground and sparked 1,000 debates. Some saw them as sweet, others saw them as sexist. But either way, they were everywhere. You would press a button and a light would turn on. You would pour in a packet and a cupcake would bake. Kind of. It was domestic life in miniature, complete with toy irons, refrigerators, and even a fake blender that whirred just enough to feel real. Girls were the target market, of course. That was the whole premise. But even boys found their way into that neon-colored domestic fantasy, because there was something weirdly satisfying about pretending to cook or clean like a grown-up. Adults teased it, said it was silly, but the truth is, these toys taught a kind of ritual, the act of making, of preparing, of caring. Whether you found it empowering or outdated, there was no denying its place in the culture. Susie Homemaker was more than a toy. It was a training ground, both playful and eerily serious. And for a lot of kids, it made the grown-up world feel just close enough to reach. It was not just a hairstyle. It was a revolution you wore on your head. The afro was loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. And in the 1970s, it became a cultural thunderclap. For years, society tried to flatten, straighten, and silence black hair. But the afro said, "No more." It was not just about fashion. It was about freedom, about choosing to be seen exactly as you are. And at first, people mocked it, called it wild, called it unprofessional. But those same people could not stop looking. The afro became a visual anthem for Black power, pride, and identity. From soul singers to civil rights leaders, from classroom desks to concert stages, the afro was there. It made people uncomfortable. That was the point. It demanded attention, and it gave a whole generation permission to stop apologizing for their roots. Literally. Stylists made fortunes, products filled shelves, and magazines were suddenly forced to shift their standards. What had once been a punchline was now a crown. It was hair as heritage, as politics, as power. And no matter how much people teased it, the afro never needed approval, because it already had the one thing that mattered: authenticity. At first glance, clogs looked like something you would wear to mock your feet. Wooden, bulky, loud. They were shoes that did not so much walk as they announced your presence to the world. People joked about them, called them European leftovers. But then, everyone bought a pair. In the 1970s, clogs went from costume shop punchline to high-fashion necessity. They came in every color. Some had studs, some had heels. And when disco fever hit, you better believe someone was wearing clogs on the dance floor. The strange thing was, they were comfortable, sort of, at least compared to what else was on the shelf. And they made you taller, louder, and somehow more confident. Kids wore them, teachers wore them. Even your uncle who swore by steel-toe boots ended up slipping into a pair. It was a movement, a wooden one. And sure, they scuffed your floors and bruised your ankles. But people loved them anyway, because clogs were not just shoes, they were a weird, clunky badge of freedom. And once they hit American sidewalks, there was no going back. You could walk into any half-lit club, basement party, or roller rink in the 1970s and see it, spinning, glinting, transforming the room into a galaxy of tiny stars. The disco ball was not born in that decade, but it owned it. This mirrored globe, cheap and hypnotic, became a centerpiece of nightlife, a beacon for every Saturday night fever dream. It was equal parts science and seduction. People teased it for being over the top, for being too flashy, too gaudy. But that was the point. The disco ball did not whisper, it screamed. And it made you feel like your moves mattered, even if your shirt was open to the navel and your pants were louder than your date. Dive bars turned into dance temples. School gyms became Studio 51 and a half. It did not matter if the floor was sticky or the music was out of sync. If the disco ball was spinning, you were allowed to be bold, dramatic, and unapologetically alive. Parents hated them. Critics dismissed them. But for everyone who ever danced under those fractured beams of light, the disco ball was not a joke. It was a tiny, spinning revolution, hanging just low enough to remind you that even in the weirdest places, you could find magic. At first, they were just for surfers and souvenir shops. Little white shells strung on elastic, the kind of necklace you bought once and wore until the cord snapped. Puka shell necklaces were humble, beachy, and easy to mock. But then something strange happened. Teen idols started wearing them. First it was a singer, then an actor. And suddenly every locker-lined hallway in America turned into a low-budget luau. They were cool now. not just for wave chasers and beachcombers, but for regular kids in landlocked towns who had never seen an ocean in their lives. The appeal was in the simplicity. They were natural, neutral, and easy to pair with bell-bottoms or bare chests. You could be dressed for algebra or a Beach Boys concert and still pull it off. And while adults dismissed them as summer camp jewelry, they kept selling. Fast. They made you feel casual but intentional. Like maybe, just maybe, you were about to get in a convertible and drive down the Pacific coast, even if you were actually waiting for your mom in a parking lot in Ohio. Mocked, copied, mass-produced, and immortalized in yearbook photos across the country, puka shells outlasted the trends that tried to bury them. They started as a joke. They ended up as a uniform. Soap saver bags were not exactly glamorous. You would not see them on a sitcom or a toy commercial. But if you grew up in the 1970s, chances are one was hanging in your shower, maybe pink, maybe beige, but always a little damp and full of mystery. It was a mesh pouch with a drawstring. And inside? All those sad, slivered remnants of old soap bars. Too small to hold, too wasteful to toss. The bag made them useful again. You would laugh at it, call it cheap. But when the soap budget was tight, or when your parents refused to throw anything away, you understood its value. The bag would foam up like a loofah. The texture was just enough to scrub, and the smell was always a strange cocktail of whatever brands had been sacrificed that month. It was resourcefulness disguised as retro hygiene. Some people even knit their own. And while no one bragged about owning one, they quietly kept using them. Over and over, because it worked. And sometimes being thrifty meant being weird. These little net sacks turned soap scraps into sudsy miracles. They were slippery, slightly gross, and oddly satisfying, just like the 1970s itself. There was a time when even your television antenna needed to express itself. Enter the antenna topper. These tiny foam or plastic shapes were the first kind of car bling for the average American. You had happy faces, dice, little pigs in sunglasses, sometimes even miniature Uncle Sams waving a flag. People called them tacky, pointless, silly, but they kept popping up at gas stations, at gift shops, on the cars of neighbors you barely knew. The thing was, they made your car feel like yours. Before bumper stickers and vanity plates, antenna toppers were your chance to say, "I exist, and I have a sense of humor." Kids begged for them. Adults rolled their eyes, then bought one for the glove compartment. There was no logic to it, no real utility, just personality on a stick. And that was enough. You could be parked in a sea of beige sedans, but if you had a giant orange ball on your antenna, you stood out. And back then, standing out, even just a little, felt like a small victory. Forget boring old ice cubes. In the 1970s, even your freezer got a flair for the dramatic. Novelty ice cube trays turned frozen water into a conversation starter. Stars, moons, fingers, dentures. You name it, someone froze it. It started as a gag, something you would see at a party or in the back pages of a prank catalog. But then people got hooked. Suddenly, you were not just making drinks. You were setting a tone. A tray of heart-shaped ice cubes could make a date night more romantic. Skull-shaped ones, perfect for Halloween punch. You could even freeze juice, dye the water, or sneak a cherry inside. Adults pretended they were for kids. Kids used them to prank adults. But really, they were for everyone who wanted their kitchen to feel just a little bit more fun. They cost next to nothing and made you look like you were trying, even if all you had was tap water and a plastic tray. Novelty ice cube trays were the kind of wacky invention you could laugh at one minute and depend on the next. And when summer hit and the Kool-Aid came out, no one ever asked for boring cubes again. Before Big Mouth Billy Bass flopped onto America's walls in the 1990s, the 1970s were already full of mounted nonsense. Singing trophies, plastic deer heads with joke microphones, rubber chickens screwed into fake wood plaques. These were not decorations. They were declarations. I refuse to take this room seriously. You would see them in basements, game rooms, rec halls, and dorm walls. They were loud, silly, and often made noise when you least expected it. Some screamed, some lit up, some just looked stupid. And that was the magic. They were conversation starters disguised as clutter. They dared you to take a joke seriously, and most people eventually did. The line between humor and horror was thin, but the laughter always won. People would mock them, then come back from vacation with one of their own. They were souvenirs from roadside Americana. They were inside jokes in gift shop form. The truth is, people crave absurdity, and the 1970s gave them just enough space to let it in. So, while the technology may have been low budget, the impact was high. These prank mounts paved the way for every animatronic fish, dancing Santa, and motion-activated gremlin that followed. They made your home into a carnival, and everyone was invited to roll their eyes and laugh. Macrame was everywhere: walls, doorways, windows, hanging plants that floated in webs of knotted rope. If it could be tied, twisted, or looped, someone in the 1970s was doing it to decorate their house. It was earthy, bohemian, and totally handmade. What started as a folk craft exploded into a national craze. Even the government got in on it, offering macrame as a therapeutic hobby in community centers. People said it looked messy, hippie-ish, too fringe, literally. But that was the appeal. Macrame was anti-plastic, anti-perfect, and anti-everything that felt cold and manufactured. It turned living rooms into jungles and hallways into art galleries. Every knot told a story, some planned, some accidental. You were not just decorating, you were weaving your personality into your walls. It made your house feel alive, warm, tactile. Even the mistakes added character. You would walk into someone's place and get lost in the knots of their personality. Each twist a little signature of time and care. And while it faded for a while, it never disappeared. Because at its core, macrame was never just about decoration. It was about taking the time to make something uselessly beautiful. And in a world chasing convenience, that still matters. Walking on shag carpeting felt like sinking into a Technicolor swamp. Your feet would disappear into the fibers. Your vacuum cleaner would cry for help. But in the 1970s, that deep pile luxury was the dream. The higher the fluff, the higher the status. It came in every hue, but the true icons were avocado green, burnt orange, and harvest gold, colors that looked like someone tried to blend a sunset with a salad. People mocked it, compared it to Muppets and lawn clippings, but they still bought it. Because shag was comfort. It swallowed your toes and your secrets. Parties felt louder, music felt warmer, and every spilled drink had a plush landing pad. No one walked on shag. They waded through it. It was cozy chaos underfoot. Kids built forts on it. Teens slow danced on it. Adults tried not to spill fondue on it. You could lay on your floor and feel like you were floating. It made a room feel softer, louder, and somehow more alive. And sure, it was impossible to clean and look tragic after a party, but for a while, shag was everything. It was not just a rug, it was an experience. If your bedroom did not glow like a radioactive jungle when the lights went out, were you even alive in the 1970s? Blacklight posters were not just decorations, they were statements. You would switch off the lamp, flip on the black light, and suddenly your walls came to life with psychedelic tigers, swirling galaxies, and mushrooms that looked like they came from another planet. Some posters were trippy, others were mildly terrifying. Most were both. They turned bedrooms into portals. Teenagers loved them, parents did not get them, and that was the whole point. You were not just decorating a wall, you were building a mood. It was part rebellion, part therapy, part sci-fi fantasy. In the glow of that ultraviolet world, you could be whoever you wanted to be. They were not supposed to match the couch or impress the neighbors. They were there for you, and maybe the friends you invited over for soda and secrets. They were weird, wonderful, and impossible to ignore, just like the decade they belonged to. Mood lipstick promised to read your soul, but it mostly just read your body temperature. You would swipe it on and wait. Would it be pink, purple, green? The tube looked like it belonged in a magic shop. The effect was subtle, but it felt like a secret only you knew. People called it a gimmick, said it was just a science trick, but that was exactly why it worked. because makeup was not supposed to be science. And yet, here it was, changing color on your lips like a mood ring for your face. Every application felt like casting a tiny spell. You checked your reflection every hour just to see what your face had to say. It turned lip color into a kind of emotional performance art. Teen girls loved it. Boys were fascinated by it. Moms pretended they were buying it for their daughters. And everyone else just watched in confused admiration. Mood lipstick was not just cosmetic. It was curious, a little spooky, a little playful, and very, very 1970s. Feathered hair was not just a style. It was a full-blown movement with blow dryers leading the charge. If your hair did not swoop, bounce, and fan out like some kind of wind-blown bird of paradise, you were doing it wrong. The look became iconic thanks to Farrah Fawcett, but it spread like wildfire through classrooms, locker rooms, and mall photo booths. People copied it from magazines, practiced in bathroom mirrors, and bragged when they finally got it right. Friends would ask what shampoo you used, even if it was just whatever was on sale. It was more than hair. It was a way to feel like you belonged to the moment. Everyone wanted that perfect layered flip, even if it meant waking up 30 minutes early and frying their roots into submission. At first, people called it overdone, too dramatic, too fluffy, but it was addictive. You could not unsee it. Salons cashed in. Home hair kits flew off shelves. Hairspray became both shield and sword, and every mirror in the house turned into a runway. Feathered hair said you cared, that you tried, that you were tuned in to something bigger than a trend. It gave your face a frame and your ego a boost. And even if humidity betrayed you and the flip fell flat, it was still worth the effort. Because in a decade built on excess, feathered hair was its soft, stylish crown. You teased it, then you teased your hair, and suddenly you were part of the club. Leisure suits walked the line between fashion and furniture. They were loud polyester miracles, usually in earth tones, sometimes in pastels, and always a little too shiny for comfort. The jacket matched the pants, the shirt matched the mood. And if you looked like a couch cushion, congratulations. You were right on trend. There was no blending in when you wore one. You sparkled under disco lights and glowed under street lamps. Entire department stores had racks devoted to them, usually next to shirts with collars that could take flight. And when you put one on, you did not just dress, you performed. People laughed at them, said they were ridiculous. But then they bought one anyway, because deep down, everyone wanted to feel a little cooler, a little looser, a little more disco. You could wear a leisure suit to the office and then straight to the dance floor. It was business casual before that phrase even existed. Emphasis on the casual. Zippers replaced buttons. Wide collars threatened takeoff. And if you were really daring, you wore it with no tie, one gold chain, and a smug grin. They were hot in the summer, itchy in the winter, and impossible to clean. But somehow, that did not matter. Leisure suits were a state of mind. They were the uniform of an era that refused to choose between relaxed and ridiculous. And if anyone mocked you, you just strutted past them, chest out, fabric flapping in the breeze. You had arrived. You could hear the clunk from across the room. That was the sound of an 8-track tape loading, bulky, awkward, and weirdly satisfying. They were the size of a small sandwich and twice as temperamental. But if you wanted to play music in your car in the 1970s, this was the only game in town. They were finicky and frustrating, but they made you feel like a real audiophile. Nothing beat the joy of hearing the hiss before the music kicked in. It felt raw and personal. You built entire glovebox libraries with your favorite road trip playlists. People called them inconvenient. They skipped, they jammed. They split albums into weird sections called programs. And yet, we loved them. Because they worked. And more importantly, they made music mobile. For the first time, your mixtape could ride shotgun. Cars had players built right in. Glove compartments filled up with chunky plastic cartridges. And every gas station sold them next to the candy bars and oil filters. Rock, disco, folk, funk, They all lived on 8-track. You learned to time your favorite songs around the sudden silence of a program change, and if the tape started to unravel, you pulled it out, rolled it up with a pencil, and hoped for the best. By today's standards, they were a mess, but back then, they were magic. They made every drive a little louder, a little cooler, a little more yours. Soap on a rope sounded like a bad joke. It was a bar of soap on a literal rope designed to hang in the shower or around your neck like a hygienic medallion. People got them as gag gifts. Dads unwrapped them at Christmas with fake enthusiasm. But then something happened. They used it, and it worked. No more dropped soap. No more soap dishes gummed up with goo. Just a clean, dangling bar that stayed put. It became a badge of dad humor and utilitarian genius all at once. You laughed when you saw it, then asked where you could get one. Somehow, it became both a punchline and a household staple. It was strangely convenient, and somehow the novelty made it feel more personal. There was a rugged charm to lathering up with something that looked like a prank, but performed like a champ. It smelled strong, it lasted long, and it looked just goofy enough to love. Over time, they came in every shape imaginable. Footballs, fish, military boots. Some people even started collecting them. Sure, it was never supposed to be a serious invention. But that is the thing about the 1970s. The lines between silly and smart got blurred. And sometimes, the best solutions were the ones we almost laughed away. The name said it all. "Gee, your hair smells terrific" was more than a shampoo. It was a declaration. A flowery, over-the-top scent bomb that exploded in your shower and followed you around all day. People teased the name, called it corny. But one sniff, and you were hooked. It did not just clean your hair, it gave you a signature, a calling card, a weapon. It was not about volume or shine, it was about being unforgettable. People remembered that smell like a song stuck in your head. Just one waft and you were back in high school, trading secrets and spray cans. You could walk down a hallway and leave a trail of compliments behind you. Girls loved it. Boys noticed. And parents rolled their eyes while secretly sneaking pumps for themselves. The scent was somewhere between garden party and bubble bath. Intense? Yes. But unforgettable. It became a cultural moment, a smell you associated with crushes, proms, sleepovers, and late-night phone calls on coiled cords. This was not just about hygiene. It was about identity. You were not just clean. You were terrific. And for anyone who ever caught a whiff, it was like opening a time capsule. One puff of that ridiculous, glorious fragrance, and suddenly the 1970s came flooding back. Pea gravel patios looked charming in home improvement magazines. Rustic, effortless, a little slice of the French countryside dropped into a suburban backyard. But once they were installed, the reality quickly set in. These patios were nothing more than a layer of loose, sharp-edged stones that never stayed in place. Chairs sank into them, tables wobbled, and walking barefoot was out of the question unless you had calluses like leather. Every breeze sent pebbles scattering into the grass, and lawnmowers did not take kindly to rogue gravel. Kids hated playing on it, pets tracked it indoors, and any kind of sweeping or raking turned into a full-blown yard battle. Even worse, the so-called drainage benefits rarely worked out, leaving the area soggy in winter and scorched in summer. Within a year, most patios looked patchy and uneven, like a poorly maintained construction site rather than a space for relaxation. Homeowners tried tamping the gravel down, adding edging, even gluing it in place, but nothing made it better. It was a great idea in theory, undone by the simplest problem: gravel rolls and people fall. Still, even inside the house, that same mix of fashion and frustration kept showing up, especially in the form of a curtain that was not quite a wall and not quite anything useful at all. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. You had not lived until you beat the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery. That was the holy grail of 1980s computer gaming. Those chunky gray computers in the school lab, that pixelated map, that relentless text box reminding you that little Timothy had broken a leg and your oxen just drowned crossing a river. Iconic. It was not just a game, it was survival. You learned real-life lessons in that pixel wilderness. Like how much meat you could carry back from a hunt, not much, or why you should never try to ford a river without thinking it through. And somehow, we were totally into it. The green and black graphics, the clunky keyboard, the fact that it felt like schoolwork but kind of fun. You would all huddle around one screen, a group of 5 kids making group decisions like mini pioneers, and somehow it felt like the fate of your wagon family actually mattered. It was your first taste of choices in gaming, your first little moral dilemmas. Do you trade clothing for bullets? Do you rest for 2 days? Or do you push on and risk everyone freezing to death? Still, once the school bell rang, it was game over. And if you wanted to know what was playing in theaters that weekend, you did not Google it. You picked up the phone. Tucked quietly beneath the sink, the under-sink water heater was one of those features you never thought about, until it saved you 5 minutes in the morning. These little tanks provided instant hot water to just one faucet. Perfect for hand washing, quick dishes, or shaving if your sink doubled as a grooming station. Unlike the giant water heater in the basement, this one was small, efficient, and practically invisible. In homes where the main water heater was far away, these under-sink units made life easier. No waiting for hot water to snake through the pipes. But over time, centralized systems improved. Builders started planning homes with better plumbing routes. Energy efficiency standards changed, and these tiny tanks were declared unnecessary. Today, most have been removed or sit unplugged, collecting dust in old houses. But their legacy lives on in those first few seconds of hot water we all take for granted. Once, someone thought of that. Once, someone made it easier. When did we stop building for the little moments? The hand-crank food mill was a quiet champion in kitchens before electric blenders buzzed their way into dominance. With its simple design, a bowl, a blade, a hand crank, and a strainer, it turned soft vegetables and fruits into smooth purees with nothing but elbow grease. It did not need a plug. It just needed patience. You would place tomatoes, apples, or potatoes inside, then turn the handle slowly. Seeds, skins, and lumps were separated out, leaving a velvety mash that tasted more honest than anything a blade spinning at 10,000 rotations per minute could produce. It was ideal for baby food, applesauce, mashed potatoes, and tomato paste. And when you used it, you were not just cooking. You were tending. You were shaping food into its gentlest form. You felt connected to the process. And maybe, just maybe, the food tasted better because you worked for it. As technology took over, the hand-crank mill faded into storage, its quiet rhythm replaced by roaring motors and flashing lights. But in some kitchens, it still lives, reliable, low-tech, and full of dignity. It is not fast, it is not sleek, but it reminds us that sometimes food is better when made slowly, one turn at a time. Popcorn ceilings were everywhere, and you did not think twice about them until one started flaking into your cereal. Created as an easy solution for soundproofing and hiding imperfections, these textured ceilings were sprayed on like cheap whipped cream, giving homes a bumpy, cratered look that no one questioned until they started falling apart. Vacuuming the ceiling became an actual task in some households, and painting over them was a test of endurance and futility. But the real danger was deeper than dust. Many popcorn ceilings contained asbestos, a now-banned toxic material that can cause serious health issues. Once people found out, the ceiling went from being just ugly to outright terrifying. Suddenly, every flake falling from above felt like a silent threat you could not ignore. That meant removing them was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous and expensive. Families who had lived under them for years were suddenly advised to bring in professionals just to make their homes safe again. Something meant to be invisible became the most threatening part of the room. And the disasters did not stop there. Just take a look under your feet. Speaking of things built right into the house, you are not going to believe what kind of doors were hiding inside the walls. For your milk. Picture this. You wake up, walk to the side of your kitchen, and open a tiny little door built right into your house. Behind it, a bottle of fresh milk, cool and ready to pour, maybe even some butter or cream depending on the day. No, it is not magic. That was the milk door, also called a milk chute. These small pass-through compartments were genius in their simplicity. One side opened from the outside, where the milkman would quietly place the day's delivery. The other opened from inside the house, so you never had to go out in your slippers or bathrobe. It was the drive-through window before there were drive-thrus. These doors were more than convenient. They were a sign that the world once ran on a shared rhythm. Everyone knew when the milkman came by. You could even leave payments or notes inside. Some had little shelves, others had insulation. And most people never locked them, because who would steal milk? Of course, once grocery stores and home refrigeration became widespread, the milk door quietly disappeared, sealed up, painted over, or just forgotten. But somewhere out there, behind layers of drywall, a few still exist. Hidden time capsules. It is hard to explain to someone today why there would be an ironing board in the kitchen. But for generations of American homemakers, ironing while cooking made perfect sense. You could press shirts while pasta boiled. The ironing board lived behind a narrow cabinet door, usually next to the fridge or near a pantry wall. You would open the latch, fold it down, and start ironing right there on the linoleum. It made the kitchen feel like a command center. Meals, laundry, homework, all happening at once. Some were even wired with built-in sockets, so you could plug in your iron without running cords across the room. There was something deeply efficient and strangely comforting about handling both dinner and dress shirts in the same breath. It made the kitchen feel like the heart of everything, not just the place where food was made. It sounds absurd now, but back then it was the ultimate multitasker's dream. Eventually, fashion changed, and so did fabrics. Permanent press clothing came along, and ironing became less of a daily ritual. Builders stopped including these wall units, and the ones that remained often jammed or collected dust. Today, a recessed ironing board in the kitchen wall feels like something out of a time capsule. You can still see the outline on painted-over cabinet doors in old houses, but no one's waiting on the kettle while smoothing out their slacks anymore. What else have we quietly stopped doing? The bread box was once as essential to the kitchen as the sink or the stove. A humble wooden or metal container, usually perched at the back of the counter, it kept loaves fresh in the days before plastic bags and preservatives took over. Its job was simple: slow down staleness and keep out pests. But its presence meant more than that. It meant you baked or bought bread regularly, that someone in the house cared about toast, sandwiches, or buttered slices to go with stew. Opening the lid released the faintest scent of yeast and crust. For kids, it was the treasure chest of after-school snacks. For adults, it was a silent reminder that home meant warmth. The sound of the lid closing, soft, final, was part of the rhythm of daily life. Bread boxes came in colors to match tiled kitchens and formica counters. They had floral decals, chrome handles, and rounded corners that looked almost cheerful. Over time, though, as preservatives lengthened shelf lives and bread became an afterthought, the box disappeared. Modern kitchens left no room for something so quaint. But in losing it, we lost a ritual. A quiet pause in the day. When did bread stop deserving a place of its own? Before there were curling wands, flat irons, and hair straighteners with 10 settings, there was one holy grail of home beauty: the built-in hairdryer chair. That is right, just like the ones at the salon. These were dome-shaped dryers, fixed right into vanities or dressing tables, and they were everything. Sit down, flip a switch, and suddenly your head was enveloped in a low hum of warm air. These machines were especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s when hairstyles like the beehive or the bouffant required serious volume and serious time. The dryers were sleek, futuristic, and a little noisy, but they got the job done. Housewives would sit under them while flipping through magazines, sipping coffee, or catching up on the neighborhood gossip. Some units were even foldable, tucking away neatly when not in use. Today, we think of beauty appliances as portable and handheld. But back then, hair care was an event, and the home adapted accordingly. These built-in dryer chairs turned the average bathroom into a personal beauty parlor. Sadly, they went the way of Aquanet and home perms. But speaking of gossip, let us head into the hallway because the next stop is where stories were shared, secrets were spilled, and teenage hearts skipped a beat. The promise of modular furniture was simple: flexibility, creativity, and smart design for small spaces. What we got instead was a collection of flimsy particle board pieces that wobbled with every move. These were the stackable shelves, folding tables, and interchangeable couch systems that dominated catalogs in the 1970s. And on paper, they made sense. Custom configurations, easy to rearrange, and light enough to move around by yourself. But there was a reason they were light. They were also fragile. The locking mechanisms broke, the cheap finishes peeled, and what looked cool in the store rarely held up under the daily wear of real life. Coffee tables would sag in the middle. Bookshelves leaned like tired soldiers. Even the stylish-looking modular couches were uncomfortable and awkward to clean. Some homeowners embraced the idea at first, charmed by the sense of innovation. But over time, the frustration set in. The dream of flexible living turned into a house full of disposable furniture. And if the modular design failed to impress, the next status symbol at least came with its own built-in glamour, until nobody wanted it anymore. Taping songs off the radio was a sacred mission. You would sit for hours next to your boombox, finger hovering over the record button, praying that the next song would be the one. And when it was, you had one shot to catch it clean, no static, no interruptions, and above all, no DJ talking over the intro. But of course, they always did. The opening notes would hit, your heart would race, and just as you hit record, that was the latest from Madonna. Coming up next, we've got... And just like that, your perfect mixtape moment was ruined. You would yell at the radio like the DJ could hear you. Why? Why do you do this to me? It was a battle of timing and nerves. Some kids got sneaky and recorded during the night shift when the hosts were quieter. Others became masters of timing, predicting when the chorus would drop, when the ad break would hit. It took real skill. And even if you missed a few seconds of the intro, you still labeled the tape like it was gold. You were not just building a playlist, you were capturing a moment. Free music, sure, but earned through effort, patience, and pure willpower. And if you were serious about your song collection, you were not stopping at one track. You were building an entire soundscape, one emotional banger at a time. Bathroom incinerators were exactly what they sound like. Tiny metal boxes installed near the toilet, designed to burn trash right on the spot. Sounds efficient, right? Maybe. But also, just a little bit terrifying. These units were popular for a short time in the mid-20th century, mostly in homes that were obsessed with cutting-edge convenience. They were meant for tissues, cotton balls, wrappers, and small bits of waste, not, let us be clear, diapers or anything major. You would flip a switch, hear a low hum, and then wait while your trash slowly vanished into ash. It was like having a personal bonfire inside your bathroom. Some even came with a little chimney that vented outside. Of course, the smell was something. And safety? Let's just say it was a different time. These machines were prone to overheating, and if you put the wrong thing in, you might get more flames than you bargained for. Eventually, people realized that trash cans and weekly pickups were a whole lot safer, so the bathroom incinerator quietly disappeared, along with the era of lighting your garbage on fire next to your shampoo. But while the bathroom was heating up, the beauty routines of the day were getting pretty cool. And I mean that literally. Just wait until you see the hairdryers. Before open concept became the norm, the kitchen pass-through window was the perfect compromise. It was a small rectangular opening in the wall, usually with a sliding panel or shutters, that connected the kitchen to the dining room. You could serve dishes straight through, peek out to check on guests, or whisper a message without leaving your post at the stove. It was functional and a little bit fun, like a drive-through for your own home. Kids loved it because it felt like a secret door. Adults loved it because it saved steps. These pass-throughs became iconic in mid-century ranch homes and suburban houses. But as walls came down and kitchens turned into wide-open living spaces, the humble pass-through lost its purpose. Some were plastered over during remodels. Others became awkward holes in drywall with no clear use. But once, they made kitchens feel like command centers, like you could be in two rooms at once. What did we gain when we knocked down those walls? And what subtle joys did we lose? The butter mold was once a quiet symbol of pride that lived in farmhouse kitchens and rural homes across the country. Before butter came in sticks wrapped in wax paper and stacked in supermarket coolers, it was made by hand, from cream churned for what felt like hours. But churning was only half the ritual. The real finish came when that butter, thick, golden, and soft, was pressed into a hand-carved wooden mold. These molds came in all shapes and designs: roses, wheat stalks, stars, initials. Some were simple, some were intricate, but all of them said the same thing. This was made with care. They were not just decorative, they were a mark of identity. In local markets and community fairs, families were recognized by their unique butter stamps. It was not branding, it was heritage, a kind of craftsmanship that was passed down like a recipe. Butter molds were rinsed, dried, and stored in the coolest cupboard. They were cleaned with a toothbrush, handled like treasure. Today, you will find them dusty on antique shelves, mistaken for cookie presses or quaint kitchen decor. But they were never just for show. They were the final touch to a process that took time, patience, and love. When did we stop honoring the beauty in what we used to make by hand? Orange and brown. Together, they were supposed to represent warmth, nature, and the grounded spirit of the 1970s. Designers called them earth tones. Homeowners called them modern. But within a few years, most people started calling them ugly. These colors crept into every corner of the house, from rust-colored curtains and burnt orange sofas to chocolate-brown carpets and gold-tinted kitchenware. When paired with low lighting and wood paneling, the effect was not soothing, it was stifling. Rooms felt smaller, homes felt older. The optimism of the post-war era was gone, and in its place came heavy, saturated tones that weighed everything down. It was like living inside a forever sunset that never let up. Even kids' bedrooms, meant to be bright and fun, often ended up looking like burnt orange caves. By the time the 1980s rolled around, decorators ran screaming toward pastels, neon, and glass. Orange and brown were buried under coats of white paint and forgotten, like the dusty shag carpets they often matched. But style was not the only thing people gave up on. Sometimes, even the furniture itself just gave out. It is one of those things you barely notice until it slides into action: pocket doors. Unlike the typical swinging door, pocket doors vanish into the wall when opened, like a magic trick you can walk through. They were the height of clever home design in the mid-20th century, especially in homes that wanted a clean, modern look without bulky doors breaking up the space. You would find them separating dining rooms from kitchens or closing off formal living rooms when company arrived. Over time, though, they became a pain. The tracks jammed, the rollers squeaked, and once one went off its rail, good luck fixing it without tearing open the wall. Slowly, builders turned back to swing doors, and pocket doors became a quirky throwback. But if those walls could talk, they would whisper about family dinners, polite goodbyes, and the satisfaction of sliding a whole room out of sight. Now, speaking of questionable style choices, wait until we step into the softest, strangest room in the house, the bathroom. Saturday morning cartoons were not just shows. They were rituals. You would wake up at 6 or 7, bowl of cereal in hand, and stake out your spot in front of the television before anyone else in the house even stirred, pajamas still on, eyes still half shut. But you were ready. The networks fought hard for your attention. ABC, NBC, CBS, they all rolled out animated powerhouses like The Smurfs, He-Man, The Real Ghostbusters, Gem, G.I. Joe, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each show had its slot, and missing one felt like missing a holiday. But for every golden episode came the heartbreak of your favorite show being bumped, or worse, replaced. The dreaded special news report could interrupt your flow like a slap to the face. You would sit there in disbelief as your cartoon got pulled for a political debate or weather update. No warnings, no mercy. Still, the lineup gave you something to look forward to all week, and for those few hours, everything felt right in the world. Cartoons, cereal, and commercials that somehow got stuck in your head forever. Because let's be honest, there are still jingles from that era that we can sing from memory, word for word. Imagine opening your cabinet to plan dinner and seeing a chalkboard right on the inside of the door. Some even had pull-down recipe scrolls made of parchment or linen, mounted like an old-fashioned map. You could write a grocery list, the day's menu, or a reminder that your mother-in-law was coming over. These weren't just novelty features. They were part of how a kitchen thought out loud. In a time before smartphones or sticky notes, these were the planners, the notepads, the command centers of the kitchen. And they told a story. In chalk dust and grease smudges, you could see a family's week unfold. Sometimes the writing faded, but the memory of it never did. It was handwriting that knew your routines better than you did. Eventually, they faded out. Whiteboards came in, then apps, then voice memos. Cupboards no longer had messages waiting. Now, kitchens are silent and glossy, all smooth wood and cold steel. No one scribbles meatloaf tonight inside a drawer anymore. The charm is gone, and so is the handwriting. But in old kitchens, those chalk smears still whisper what once was. When did we stop writing things down where it mattered most? Plastic laminate countertops were everywhere in the 1970s, bright, glossy, and available in an endless parade of colors and faux textures. From butcher block prints to swirling marbles, these surfaces were supposed to look fancy without the fancy price tag. And for a short while, they did. But the plastic finish scratched easily, melted under hot pans, and chipped if you dropped anything heavier than a spoon. The edges would start to curl, the seams would swell, and if water got underneath, the entire counter could buckle. Once the damage started, there was no easy fix. Families either lived with the bubbling mess or had to replace the entire slab. Still, for a generation strapped for cash but hungry for style, laminate was the default. It felt modern until it very suddenly did not. And when people stepped outside to escape the chaos of the kitchen, they were often met with a patio that was just as frustrating. Let us talk about the rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory-making. The name says it all, rumpus. No rules. just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. There was a time when flour was not just something you kept in a bag in the pantry. In the mid-20th century, many kitchens came with a built-in flour bin right in the counter, an aluminum drawer that pulled out like a bread box and held pounds of flour at once. At the bottom of that bin, a small metal crank-operated sifter attached directly to the front panel. You turned the handle and watched flour fall like powdery snow into a bowl. Housewives loved it because it was fast, tidy, and always right where you needed it. There was a rhythm to it. The soft grind of metal, the whisper of sifted flour, the calm before the dough. It was not just about baking, it was about the ritual that came before it. But as kitchens got sleeker and flour got sold in resealable paper bags with built-in spouts, this feature disappeared. New cabinets were built without them, and most people never even noticed. Today, the few remaining ones are either sealed shut or filled with junk no one wants to deal with. You can find one in an old home and still smell the ghost of biscuits and pie crusts. But no one teaches you how to use the crank anymore. Like so many kitchen traditions, it quietly faded into the background, and now it lives only in memory, or maybe in Grandma's house if you are lucky. When did our tools become so disposable? If one of these brought back memories, comment your favorite, hit like, and subscribe before the past fades again.